So the chances are you have a boss, but do you know how to influence your boss? And I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about sucking up. Do you know how to manage up? How to get what you want, but then also how to get what helps the organization? Well, my guest today, Melody Wilding, is an expert at this. She wrote a best-selling book. It's called Managing Up, and she's here to help us master the essential conversations that we need to have and how to have them to be more successful, to have more autonomy, and how to have more good days at work. Let's jump in. Well, hello, my friend, and welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast. I'm Cal, and I hope this episode will help you lead yourself better, because when you do, that's going to inspire more people, and I think that makes the world a better place. That's my vision for this show, and I'm so grateful to have you here today. Melody Wilding is an incredible guest. She's the best-selling author of Trust Yourself and Managing Up. She's a licensed social worker with a master's from Columbia, and she's just incredible at giving actionable steps to influence at work. We discuss what managing up really means. We talk about the triple win, which you're going to love. We also talk about emotional intelligence, my favorite topic, 5 power conversations that you need to have and how to have them, how to deal with micromanagers, how to set boundaries at work, and how to make your boss a better boss. And if you enjoy this, please subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. If you haven't checked me out over at YouTube, please join the over 11,000 people that have subscribed over there. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Melody Wilding. Well, Melody, I've been really looking forward to have you on the show. I've listened to several of your conversations. Of course, I've got your book. So thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
So let's just start with, I love the Charlie Munger idea of kind of defining something by what it's not. So let's start there. You've written a book on managing up. I'm sure when people hear that phrase, all kinds of things pop in their head. Tell us at the outset, what are you not talking about when you talk about managing up?
We are not talking about sucking up, ingratiating yourself, manipulation. That is not what we are doing here. And actually, managing up is also not, at the end of the day, really about your manager. And I think most of us, we're turned off from the concept because we hear that and we think it sounds political, it sounds conniving, it sounds disingenuous. Who wants to do that? Who wants to be a suck up or just a people pleaser? And often when we're told you need to get better at managing up, make your boss look good is the very next thing we hear, which is very focused on the other person. But what I'm advocating for, and what I believe very strongly, is that managing up is not something you do for your manager's benefit. You do this for yourself so that you have the clarity, the resources, the opportunities that you need, the conditions that you need to be most successful.
So what is kind of your top line message to someone who you're trying to convince them, hey, you need to read this book, you need to pay attention to this material. What is the primary why behind that?
I'm going to cheat because there's a few. They are all interconnected. But the first one I would say is that you can have personal power even if you don't have positional power.
That's good.
This book really came about because of the pandemic. And so many people I saw around me who were in my coaching programs that I was working with directly, feeling like they were out of control at work, meaning that they were just jerked around by the reorg, by getting their third new boss in a year, changing priorities every other day. Just people's personalities, the quirks, the idiosyncrasies we all have, just feeling at the whim of all of that. And managing up really is the key for you to feel more grounded, more in control, to feel like you are in the driver's seat of what's happening around you, even if, and especially if, you are operating in imperfect conditions with imperfect people, which most of us are. So that's one core message. And it goes hand in hand with this idea that we teach people how to treat us. If we are approaching a relationship with someone in power and we're constantly putting ourselves in a one down position, or we are sharing an idea and then the very next sentence is, well, I don't know if that's actually a good idea. We don't have to do that. We could go with whatever you say. Then we're teaching people not to take our proposals seriously. And so it goes hand in hand with that too. We teach people how to treat us. And if we can come to our relationships with those in authority with more assertiveness, not aggression, but just more self-assuredness, that's going to make all of the difference in how people respond to you and the results you get and how you feel about those interactions.
Yeah. This is a really helpful message for me. I know you went on the From the Green Notebook podcast with my friend Joe Byerly, and I appreciated his perspective with the military audience because it's kind of trained into us to, of course, be deferential, and that's good. We should be respectful. So it's hard to know what proper assertiveness looks like and feels like. So this work is super helpful. I'm also kind of a recovering people pleaser. So assertiveness always is something I struggle with a little bit. I also think, Melody, this message, you mentioned the pandemic. I also wonder your thoughts when we're moving into the world of AI. I just feel like things are changing so fast. I wonder, where do you see this message fitting in that space where it's dynamic, it's uncertain, it's complex, things are changing so fast? We have how many generations right now all working on the same teams in the same space? So I wonder where you see this material and this message fitting into that.
Yeah. And I think it's 4 or 5 generations now in the workplace.
Crazy.
Yeah. And at a couple of levels, yes, we have all of this change happening so fast that you want to make sure that you don't just feel tumbled in those waves, but also this skill of managing up, which at the end of the day is about understanding your own psychology, but also being able to influence that of others and navigate and decode theirs. That's going to become your competitive edge, because currently, and probably not in the very near future, that's not something that AI is going to very quickly replicate. And so in this new environment, that EQ, the ability to read between the lines, to bring people together, to navigate your different stakeholders, all of that is going to be much more important than your technical skills, which AI will, in many cases be able to replicate much faster. So I think this is becoming, yes, it's quote unquote a soft skill, but it really is becoming an essential power skill moving forward.
I also really appreciate your background, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you see it fitting into this, because correct me if I'm wrong, you have a background as a therapist, and then you also are an executive coach and a teacher. I'm just curious, how have all these different hats that you've worn, probably sometimes at the same time, how does that all fit into this idea of helping people both lead themselves, but also manage up?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're correct. Yes. So my background is as a therapist. I went to school to be a social worker, and that was my life's dream from when I was little, was to be a therapist, because I've always been curious about people's behavior. Why do we do what we do? And why, if you say something one way to someone, you get one response, but you say it the same way to somebody else and you get a totally different response. Why is that? And so when I graduated with my degree and started practicing therapy, what I very quickly realized was the group of people I was working with, who at the time were a lot of startup executives, tech founders in Silicon Valley in New York City. They didn't want therapy in the traditional sense of unpacking their childhood and all of that. They wanted something that was, number one, much more practical, but number two, was focused on their professional challenges, because back when I started out, there wasn't a lot of support for that, especially the mental and emotional challenges, the dynamics we're operating under at work, whether it's imposter syndrome, some of those internal parts, kind of our own insecurities and hangups, or it's with other people, whether it was a leader trying to deal with an underperformer, whether it was someone trying to get through to their manager or advocate for a promotion. There's so many emotions mixed up in that around your self-worth. And I don't want to overstep, but I'm also feeling resentful that I'm not getting this recognition. There's so much to unpack there. And I saw this opening where really we are dumped into our careers without any training in how human motivation, influence, persuasion, how any of that works. Yet for so many of us, especially when you hit mid-career, there comes this inflection point where, yes, your technical skills got you there, but just like we were saying a moment ago, what's going to get you to the next echelon is your people skills.
Yeah.
And we're very rarely given any training on that. We're just expected to figure it out through trial and error. And so that was a big impetus for this work. And what I do now is, a moment ago, I was referring to this idea of managing your own inner psychology and navigating others. I call that your professional power position, because you could be the most confident person in the world, but if you don't know how to persuade up your chain of command, you're not going to get very far. Now, on the other hand, I could give you the most perfect script or direction for executive presence in a meeting, but if you crumble in that moment because you don't have good emotion regulation, also not going to get very far. So really being successful is having that combination. It's the confluence of both of those things.
I love that. Melody, I was telling you before we hopped on that I teach leadership, and one of the things I teach is emotional intelligence. And especially when we have maybe younger audiences in those classes, I can just see their eyes light up when we start talking about emotional intelligence, because they realize, wow, either I really need this, or my boss really needs this, or this is going to help me interact with my boss. So I love that that's your background, that you bring that rich therapy experience with clients and individuals who want more practical stuff. And that's what you give in this book, which is really cool. And I think this book is going to be super helpful for any leader listening in this dynamic environment, because what you do in this book is you give 10 conversations and you give us a sense of how to navigate these often difficult but very common conversations. And so it is truly a playbook, but it's also not like a top 10 list, like, oh, do this, do that, do that. It is flexible and adaptable and practical enough to be helpful in this constantly changing environment. So I think that's really helpful. Talk to us though about the interplay between emotional intelligence and the kind of power dynamics of an organization. I mean, ultimately, it's a question of, at a top level, how can people really influence?
Yeah. And we can unpack some of those 10 conversations, because there's a particular order that they're built in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that plays into part of this emotional intelligence conversation, because if we just skip, so for example, we start out with the alignment and the styles conversation. We need those in place first to build trust, rapport, frankly, likability, and making sure that that person knows we're for them, we're not against them. We need all of that before we have conversations like advancement, money. And that's part of emotional intelligence, is gauging the strength of the relationship, and even small things like tone and timing. For example, in the feedback chapter, I spend a lot of that chapter dedicated to, should you even give this feedback? And then, okay, if we get past that checkpoint, then when should you give it? Right after the incident happens? Should you take a day? And there's all these nuances and considerations that can positively or negatively affect the relationship if we're not paying attention to them, considering them enough. So I think being able to read those, there are so many invisible dynamics that are happening around us in the workplace. And people will often tell me, I don't want to play politics. I just want to focus on my work. I want my work to speak for itself. I don't do that. I don't play the game. And that sounds nice, but it is naive. It is not noble to opt out of politics, because they are happening around you, whether you like it or not. You can navigate them with integrity. And I hope that is what this book helps you do. That was certainly my goal. But we have to realize that those dynamics, they're going to happen whether we like it or not. And it's, do we want to feel like we are steering and shaping that relationship by paying attention to some of those invisible cues, not only from the person we're communicating directly with, but even things like, Who comes off mute on a meeting? Who has their camera on? Who has their camera off? Who is CC'd on certain emails? Those are all power signals of what's happening around you. So we have to keep our eyes open for that and really take that into account with whatever moves we're thinking about making.
I love that. So I don't normally do this, but what I want to do, if we can, I do want to maybe try to go through the first 5 conversations, and we're not going to obviously go through all of them, but I've listened to you explain these many times. You're really good at getting practical for leaders. So I want the leaders to have the benefit of hearing you talk through these different conversations and some of the key points. Before we start though, one of my favorite concepts that I've heard you talk about is this idea of the triple win. What is that, and how is that maybe a mindset that is helpful, overarching for thinking about leading up?
Yes.
Or I guess managing up, excuse me.
Leading up to, that's a good way to describe it as well. Yeah. The triple win means looking for a win for you, something that's beneficial to your career, your satisfaction, for your manager or your leader, and also the organization or the team as a whole. If you can find an idea, a proposal, a way of framing a boundary or a pitch that meets that triple win, then that is the best place to be. And also it feels a lot better for you because it doesn't feel like I am just doing this selfishly. I'm doing something that matters and is meaningful in the big picture.
Can you give us an example of maybe one that you've seen from your clients or even yourself? Like what's an example of a triple win where a leader might think about it differently? Something that might at first seem, oh, this is just for me or just for the organization, but actually there's an alignment there.
Yeah. So there's 2 examples that come to mind for me. One would come from ownership. So there's an entire chapter on the ownership conversation, which is how do you decide what problems are worthwhile to solve and then actually get buy-in to go after them, to not just stay contained in your job description. And this is one place where the triple win comes in. Can you identify something? Maybe I talk about neglected needs. Maybe there's something that keeps falling to the bottom of the agenda that no one ever seems to get to. Can you find something that for you might be enjoyable to work on or would help build your skill set that might be beneficial for your manager, either helping them streamline a workflow or making them look good to somebody else or giving them a point they can report up their chain of command. And then to the organization overall, is this something that could be imported into other teams or saves the company money? That would be a great example of finding something that is at that intersection of the triple win. Another example, in the boundaries chapter, I talk about where possible, framing your boundaries around what's in it for them. So if we're just saying, giving me this deadline with 24 hours notice makes no sense. I can't do that. Instead, saying, okay, I appreciate you letting me know about this. 24 hours is going to be a little tight. If I had until next Wednesday, that means I would be able to give you the most accurate data possible to make sure that you have the right information for the board and ultimately that we're going to have the soundest plan possible as we work towards these objectives for Q1. So it's sort of a positioning there as instead of focusing the boundary on you, you're saying, how is my request in service of you getting something out of this as well?
Yeah, that's so helpful because it is hard to, even when you feel like someone is crossing a boundary, at least for me, it's hard for me to articulate that without it feeling so self-focused or even soft or weak. Like, what do you mean I can't do that? But you're right. Like but instead if I'm like, actually 2 weeks ago, you told me, you maybe wouldn't say it like this, but 2 weeks ago, we had a big meeting where we clarified the priorities for these few weeks. Where does this fit within those priorities that have already been articulated? Has it changed? Where would you like me to focus instead of where we talked about before? Now I am, of course, benefiting because I have clarity about what I should be focused on. I'm not over committing. There's not just too much on my plate. And I'm presenting it in a way that does help the boss or the leader and the organization. That is so helpful for someone with my personality. So I love the way you articulate it. And that's what this book is full of. It's full of those types of very practical and adaptable types of conversations, which, going back to the thing we talked about before, is even more important in a world that's constantly changing. Because literally 2 weeks ago, those may have been the priorities. And now things have just shifted so fast in the market or in the environment that we're operating in. We need to be able to quickly adapt. So let's jump to alignment. What is alignment all about? What do leaders need to know about aligning?
Yes. The alignment conversation is where everything begins. It is the most foundational conversation that everything else is built on. It is never too late to have it. Let me say that too, because people always ask me that. Like, I don't think I've had this. Have I screwed everything up? Can I not have any of the other conversations? No, it is never too late. And everything we're going to talk about today, these conversations, they intersect and they interweave. As much as I wish it was as clean as do number one, number two, number three, life just doesn't happen like that. So let me say that. Alignment is about figuring out what is the most important, meaningful work for me to be doing right now, so that you don't feel like you're spinning your wheels, you're wasting time. You eliminate that frustration of, you go away to work on something and then you bring it back to your boss and they say, oh, well, things have changed, or this is not what I wanted. We want to eliminate that. And so the alignment conversation is also making sure you are rowing in the same direction as the rest of your team. I actually tell a story at the beginning of that chapter where I was laid off. I was let go. My role was cut. And that was largely because I failed to have this conversation. I was aligned on a very superficial level with my manager, like week to week, day to day. What are you working on? Okay. Status, all good. But I didn't have deep alignment. And what I mean by that was I had not pressed around how the work I was doing, the initiative I was on, how that really mattered in the medium to long term for the organization. And long story short, it was a pet project of my current managers that was seen as very ancillary to the core business. And so it was cut, and me along with it. And that is a extreme case of what can happen when you don't have alignment. But day to day, it's basically making sure you are on the same page with your leadership, your manager, and beyond. We also start with alignment because it's one of the easier conversations to have. It's so much of it is observing where budget is flowing, where attention is going. But it's also about asking questions to really get in your manager's head, to more deeply understand beyond just what are your priorities, to really try to uncover what are some of the pain points or unspoken goals that they have.
I'd love to get into maybe some of the details of the tactical of how this looks, because a couple thoughts going through my mind are, well, I don't want it to appear to the boss like I haven't been listening, or that I don't have my own ability to figure out what's important. So that's one thought that's going through my head. I'm also curious. It also seems like maybe one of those conversations where there's a lot of things you could say that would be wrong, or questions that would come across. So what are the do's and don'ts of having this conversation? And is this literally a conversation you would recommend every day? Like, how often should we have this?
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about frequency, and then you might have to remind me as I work backwards.
Yeah.
So frequency, it depends. You might be in an environment where, let's say you are on a tech team, and I have clients that work on technical teams where they do sprints, and they need to make sure they are that tightly aligned, that they're having stand-ups every single day to make sure this is what I'm focused on today. Is that still accurate? Did we get new feature requests? So it is dictated by the structure of your work. But in most cases, it's not something that you need to be doing every day. It can be a formal sit down that you have. Any transitional point is a good time to do that. Beginning or the end of the quarter, halfway through the year, a different season, the end of a certain project, the beginning of a new one. Finding some sort of natural transition point can be a good reset to say, hey, I want to revisit this and make sure we're on the same page. Or this is something you can also sprinkle into your one-on-ones as you're meeting, to just also get a quick pulse check on that. So that is frequency. Now, give me your other questions.
Yeah, tell us the do's and don'ts really, but I'm also just kind of curious, like what are some good questions to ask that are received well, but also get you what you need as a person, a junior in this relationship. Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, I think you'll really enjoy my weekly newsletter. It's called The Intentional Letter. Each Sunday, I share reflections on inspiring leaders, lessons I'm learning while I teach leadership, books I'm reading. It's short, it's thoughtful, and it's designed to help you grow as a leader and as a person. And best of all, it shows up for free in your inbox every week. I'd love to have you join this community of leaders. You can sign up right now using the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Yes. So some of my favorite questions, I think my number one is, what are the metrics you discuss with your manager? Or what are the metrics you are asked about the most? Because those might not be the same as the ones that are on paper or that are in your slide deck. The ones that they are actually asked about the most, tested on, will tell you a lot about where you should be placing your focus, because if your boss is under increased scrutiny for that, they're going to be very grateful that you are paying attention to those. So that can be very instantly clarifying for you. Another one I like is, talk to me about what good performance looks like in this role over insert time period. 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is. The time bounding of that makes it easier for your manager to actually wrap their head around. And you're going to ask, what does good performance look like? Let them answer. And then ask, what does great performance look like? And so that contrast there forces them to think a little bit more about what are some of the maybe abstract criteria of how someone is more behavioral. How are they showing up? How are they performing? What is their attitude, their mindset? So those are still things you are being evaluated on that, again, you may not have gotten otherwise. You also asked, how do I ask these questions in a way that makes sure, or doesn't give the perception, rather, I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't know what's going on. And
you haven't been paying attention.
Yes.
Weren't you in the meeting? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it is totally fine to say, my understanding of the situation is this, or what I've gathered from our, QBR meetings is this. Is that correct? Am I on point? Has anything changed? Because I realize you are in conversations that I am not privy to, and I want to make sure that we are pivoting and adjusting as needed. So you can share your perspective and your understanding, and then ask for them to fill in the gaps.
That's really good. This is so helpful, Melody. Even as you're kind of sharing these questions, I'm almost receiving it as if you're asking me. So if I'm the leader and I've been in the situation, you are really helping me by asking me these questions, because you're forcing me to get clear in my head. Okay, what is a good performance? And then what is a great performance? Which is so helpful, because I actually want you to know that. I want you to succeed, but I might just be busy, or I may not have taken the time to think about it and really have that clear picture in my mind. I also love the question about what are the biggest metrics that your leader is focused on, because I've also noticed, I think sometimes we assume that our boss has it all figured out. It's like they know it all, they see everything, they're in all the meetings. But having been in those positions, so often I'm trying to figure out myself as the leader. Like, I'm trying to figure out what my boss cares about. I'm trying to figure out where the organization is headed, and things are changing so fast. So that can be a really helpful series of questions and conversations to help that leader think for themselves. And maybe they're even more aware when they go into that next meeting to say, oh, let me really pay attention, to get back to Melody about what are the most important metrics. So this is super helpful. Anything else on that first alignment? I mean, I know you've written an entire chapter on it, but is there anything else high level that you practically leaders should know on that alignment conversation?
Well, I do want to say that all of this is part of a larger campaign to position yourself not as a subordinate or an order taker, but more as a trusted partner and an advisor to your leader.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's really valuable to get this clarity, specifics around what you should be doing and not doing, but you're also signaling the level, the altitude at which you're performing at, or that you're meeting your manager at, that you're not just, again, you're not just taking orders. You're not just checking off a checklist. You are an active participant. You are problem solving. You are more strategic. And like you were saying, it's prompting them to think, and you can have higher level, more substantive conversations with them, which is so valuable for positioning you in a different way. So I just wanted to underscore that.
Yeah, and I also like to think about what is my motive, and maybe this is not where you go, Melody, but just for me, I actually want to make the organization better. I actually want the organization to succeed. And these are actually ways that will happen. These are ways that my leader will be more successful. I'll be more successful. The organization, going to that triple win idea. So how does, maybe I have this wrong, but does the alignment conversation build to the styles conversation? Like, are they connected in an important way?
Good question. Yes. So I like to say, if alignment is what we are trying to achieve, then styles is, how do we go about that in a way where we can reduce the clashes and conflicts as much as possible?
Okay.
So when I say the styles conversation, I'm referring to communication and work styles. How does someone like to approach their work in terms of preferences around how they process information, give and receive feedback? Because if you could be totally aligned, you could be totally on the same page, but the way you go about getting there together, your manager may be someone who in that chapter I call a commander dominant type. They move very quickly. They act usually without complete information, because they're more comfortable taking risks. They don't need as much consensus or any consensus before they take action. They tend to be a bit more contrarian, so they'll poke holes in things. But if you are someone who in that chapter I would call a caretaker, which values stability, harmony, understanding where people are coming from, you want to think before you act, you could be going the same place, but your approaches to getting there are vastly different. And if you don't realize that, if you're not cognizant of it, and better yet, make adjustments, make tweaks to how you're communicating, presenting information to actually get your message heard, you're not going to get very far.
So helpful. It made me immediately think of the disc. Like, I was thinking of the commander as like the D over there, just moving out, and maybe the S over there, kind of. Oh, well, let's think. I'm more of an SI on the disc. So how do we figure this out? Well, I guess before that, is my focus more on understanding my leader's type and style, or is it more being aware of myself?
I think it's a both and. So you were referring to the disc. There's lots of different models that all revolve around this same research, which is that communication styles broadly break down into two dimensions, which is dominance. I mentioned that one. So how quickly does someone like to move? How much control do they like to have in a situation? And sociability. How much does that person prioritize connection and their relationships with other people? You plot that, you generally get 4 different styles. So you have discs, you have the colors, the red, green, yellow, blue, all sorts of different models. In this book, I call them the 4 C's. So we talked about the commander, who is high dominance, lower on sociability. We talked about the caretaker, who is lower on dominance, high on sociability. But we also have the cheerleader, high on dominance, high on sociability. So that is someone who is more, they still move quickly. They like to have control in a situation, but they're more people oriented. So they tell a lot of stories. They tend to be more enthusiastic and a bit more warm. They're more of that big picture, mission, vision oriented person. And then last, you have the controller, who's low in both of those dimensions. This is someone who cares a lot about precision, accuracy, process, methodology. They may ask, they want a lot of data and facts. They're very thorough. They can sometimes seem a little cold, though. So all of these types you could hear, they have pluses and negatives. And when you can decode the style of who you're working with, whether that is your leader, it's a project lead, it's your skip level, it's a board member, whoever it is, it really gives you a cheat code to understand how to flex to get through to that person. Because classic example is a caretaker like me tends to lead with a lot of context. I want to share how we got here and who was involved and give you the whole background and everything before I get to the main point.
Yeah,
but the commander gets very frustrated by that. They will cut you off. They will seem very snappy, but to them, they feel like you are being long-winded.
Yeah.
And you can see here, it's just a misunderstanding, because what we often perceive as difficult behavior is just a matter of difference. And so if we get that, well, this person is cutting me off because they have a preference for bottom line up front, military, right? Bottom line up front, bluff. Then we can make that small tweak. We don't have to completely abandon our approach and what we value, but we can just make a different choice in specific situations that gets us a better result. So that's the value of knowing both somebody else's and our style. We know what adjustments to make, but when we know our own style, then we can also share that in our relationships with people. If, for example, let's say you are starting off a relationship with a new manager. There is an entire exercise in the book I have called the Me Manual.
Yes. I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah, you can fill that out. You can share that with your manager to say, hey, I want to make sure we can get off on the right foot and that you get the best performance out of me. Here are some insights and reflections and feedback I've gathered over the years. That may sound strange to do. And in some cultures, it may be totally out of the norm. You have to read the room there. But you were mentioning before that most managers really love when you just get to the point like that and you save them cognitive overhead trying to figure that out. So it can really go a long way.
Absolutely. I love everything you're saying, because so often as a leader, I really want to have that information. That takes a lot of time. Yeah. And certainly great leaders will take the time to get to know that. They'll figure that out. Maybe we'll do some assessments. But if you can save me as the leader that cognitive energy and demonstrate a level of self-awareness, I am very impressed. And it's going to help us work through things that unfortunately will break down trust if we are making assumptions about people and their motives, when it might just be we just have very different ways of being upfront. I really think this is helpful. So if I'm a junior member and I have a new manager, how do I go about understanding the type that they are?
A couple of ways. So observation is your first go-to. You're going to hear some of these signals in the types of wording someone uses. So even like for a cheerleader, for example, you'll notice more possibility-oriented language. This is going to open up a lot of opportunities for us. Big picture strategy. They tend to have more of that like energetic type language behind them versus someone like a controller. I mentioned a few terms like methodology. We want to make sure we're turning over every stone here before we take action. You're going to pick up on some of those things and how they approach the work. You can also talk to people who have worked with them before. Yeah. So I have a lot of clients do this actually when they move up to more of a senior level, because you have less access to someone who is in the C-suite. And so you need to rely on that person's second, third in command to understand, how do they work? What do they like in terms of when I present to them? Are there landmines I should look out for, or things I should always remember, questions I should always remember to ask that person? So you can ask the people around you for that. And even if you are just kicking off and you don't feel comfortable sharing your Me Manual, what I suggest is still bring up the styles conversation and ask for somebody's preferences and then offer your own. So you could say, we are inevitably going to have times where we want to give each other feedback. When I have something I want to share with you that I think could make our work better, how do you want me to do that? What's the best way to bring that to you?
So good.
And you let them answer, and then you say, great, here's what I have found works best for me, right? So it becomes more of this two-way dialogue instead of, boss, tell me what you need and I'll contort to anything you need.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I've heard you explain this before too, of just, hey, how do you want to receive feedback?
Yeah.
How often do you want to give
Yeah.
feedback? Is that helpful? And how are we going to deal when we disagree? I've even heard you talk about that. And that is, I've never done that, but hearing you say it, it almost seems so obvious. Like, why do I not do that? And that's what I love about your work here. So we have alignment. We kind of know, okay, what's important. We're both in agreement. I know the style of my leader. Now, where does this ownership conversation, which is the third conversation, where does ownership fit in? Why is that important?
Yeah. So now we're ready to take action, right? And that's what the ownership conversation is all about. And I mentioned before that it's about how do you build buy-in for the things you want to do. And we had to have alignment and styles in place because we want to make sure we're taking ownership around something that is actually aligned with the organization,
Right.
our
Yeah.
manager's goals, that is actually promotable work for us to focus
Yeah.
on. And that when we go about getting buy-in, we're doing it in a way that's adapted to their style so that they'll hear it. And so that's why with ownership, so much of it is about planting seeds.
Okay.
Almost regardless of any style, almost everyone in leadership or in power that you're going to work with is not, they don't want to be caught off guard. They don't want a negative surprise. So if you just come out of the gates and say, I'm changing this process, that's not going to go over well. People are going to get defensive. So you have to bring people along on the journey with you, right? Persuasion is a bit of a long game to kind of get people on your side. And in that chapter, I talk about a couple of techniques. They come from actually the godfather of persuasion, who is Robert Cialdini. He actually has a whole book called Persuasion, not persuasion, but persuasion, which is the thing you do before you persuade. And it's all about laying the groundwork for your idea, gradually exposing people to it so that when you do want to take action, when you do make a more of a concrete request, it just feels like the natural next step. It doesn't feel like it's coming out of the blue. So you may be asking your boss questions. Like, let's say you want to take on totally recreating your employee onboarding process. You might, in your one-on-ones with your manager, be bringing up, what would you like to see be better here? Or what are the biggest struggles we've been having in this area? So that when you do make your pitch, you can tie it directly to that. So that persuasion is so important before just coming out.
So it sounds like here we're really trying to identify that triple win of, okay, I want to take ownership over this. There's something about this work that is interesting or I see as important. I'm trying to make sure it's aligned with the boss and the organization. What are some other important aspects of persuasion and I guess persuasion? What are some other keys to doing this well?
Yeah. Well, with persuasion, I was sort of leading to this, but pulling on pain levers or pleasure levers. Now, we want to talk about how might this idea or proposal decrease pain? So frustration, friction, money, time wasted, or how will it increase pleasure? So how will it give us a sort of benefit? Will it save us time? Will it make us look better? Will it help us get ahead of the competition? And the more we can frame it in those concrete terms, whenever I am reviewing communications for my clients, they'll send me decks or proposals that they're sharing. This is the number one thing that is missing. The so what, or what does it do for me at the end of the day? So thinking about what are those pain and pleasure levers, that's really important. And also when you present an idea, we're often told come with solutions, not problems.
Yeah.
That's the classic managing up adage. But what you really should do is come with trade-offs. And what I mean by that is walking your manager, yes, make a recommendation, but walk them through what were some of the factors you weighed to get here. So they can not only see your point of view, but they understand the rationale that went into it. And they can tell then, oh, that person thinks like me. They were thorough. They considered these things. So you may say, it's time that we revisit this process. And I've put together a plan for how we might go about that. My recommendation that I'll walk you through is for option A. But I want to let you know I went through and I weighed cost, time of implementation, the level of risk involved, and all of that is factored in here, right? That is going to be just a different level of conversation than just, well, I reviewed the plan and I think we should go with option A. End of story. So, yeah.
What is the first step? So let's say someone's like, hey, I feel like I'm pretty aligned with my boss. I feel like I kind of know what their style is. I'm all in on ownership. I see the value in that. What would you tell that person right now to say, hey, okay, if you want to engage in this ownership conversation, go do this right now. Go ask this question. Go think about this. What would you tell them to go do?
I would say, can you find a low risk ask that you can have success with? This is the foot in the door technique, which is get your foot in the door with something that is lower risk, proof of concept, and then leverage that to make a bigger ask. So can you find something that would be a small win that you can then build on, or position it as a pilot, an experiment, a trial run? That also helps decrease the sense of risk. It can make somebody much more amenable to say, yeah, we'll try that for 2 weeks and see how it goes. So think about, is there anything that you want to do that you could frame in those terms?
Is this something that is already, I guess I'm trying to understand the difference between this and maybe something that's already explicitly been given to me. Are these things that are outside of those things that are already, my boss has already said, hey, Cal, these are the 3 things, maybe in our alignment conversation, these are the 3 things I want you to focus on. So are these in addition to that or different than that? Where do these fit within that?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
They could be different, but they could also be within the work you've been given, you approaching it maybe a different way than your boss might, or you wanting to, for example, let's say you've been given, you have to do a certain client presentation and you want to experiment or lead more of it, for example. That's where this could come in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard you talk too before about the importance of drafts, like giving your boss drafts along the way. Where does that fit in? Is that more alignment, ownership? Is that kind of all throughout?
It definitely, it crosses over, I would say, more so styles and ownership. Depending on your boss's style, they may want to see or be more involved with the actual building of the plan or the project, right? Someone who is, I would say, the caretaker or the controller is usually going to want that level of detail and oversight, for example. But with the ownership conversation, a way that we get buy-in is to make sure people have visibility into how the work is going. Because I can't tell you how many times I'll have people that are given a piece of work and then they go away and they know they're working on it. But other people feel this sense of uncertainty or even insecurity because they don't know where things are at. And we don't want to create that negative feeling for people. So so the more you can have, let's say, a dashboard they can just pop into, or you're sending just a weekly debrief of what's going on, the better, because it soothes. Ironically, it can actually soothe that urge or that compulsion for someone to check in, because they feel like, okay, I know things are happening. I know what's going on. I don't have to be on top of that person.
Yeah, I can see that really helping, especially the leader that maybe is a little more prone to micromanagement and just feeling the need to not just know where something is at, but they want to see all the little pieces that are happening. So if you're pushing information as opposed to pulling it, I also, that the light bulb just went off when you were talking about these drafts, because the last few jobs I've had, I've been kind of in that junior role and trying to help a senior leader think through things. And I have noticed it was so helpful. And it might've just been the leader. If I give them a draft, if I give them a presentation and say, hey, I put some stuff together, here's my rationale behind this. Let's talk off of this, as opposed to just going to them and saying, boss, what do you think? Yeah. And that also just that just takes so much more of the mental load for the boss than to say, oh, okay, we have a picture. Let me edit, as opposed to create. So I could see how that's super helpful. We're kind of getting close to time here, but I did want to make sure and give you a chance to talk about these I'd say last two, the fourth and the fifth, because these are where, this is probably where your work speaks to my heart the most. And we're talking about the idea of boundaries and feedback, especially boundaries. My heart breaks for people who really want to do well. They really care. As you say, they're kind of these sensitive strivers, and they just can't, they have such a hard time managing their energy and managing their time because there's no boundaries. So talk to us in the last minute or two we have about this, because these do relate, this idea of getting your boundaries straight and kind of protecting those, but then also being able to give feedback to your boss.
Yes. Well, I'll say with boundaries, the mindset shift for any sensitive striver, if even that term resonates with you, you will know that. But the mindset shift is that if you are trying to do everything, you may be inadvertently be creating the perception that you can't handle things, because so many people come to me after getting denied a promotion or wanting to take on a stretch project and being told no, because leadership doesn't see they know how to prioritize, or they think you already seem a bit stretched with everything you have. We can't give you more, or no one else can do your role. So this sort of overfunctioning can actually come back to hurt you in that way, but it also creates this dynamic where other people around you can underfunction, your team, your cross-functional colleagues, which only creates more resentment. So the cycle goes round and round. So it's sort of
can I say something on that? Because
Yeah.
that you just spoke to me. Maybe I'm a sensitive striver, because that absolutely. But meanwhile, I'm thinking, look at everything I'm balancing, look at everything I'm managing.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like the perception could be the exact opposite of like, wow, they're barely making it. I don't think that they can handle much. Wow. Thank you. So
Exactly.
keep going. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that resonates with me.
Yes, exactly. So that's usually a big aha for people. And so when it comes to boundaries, I would say my favorite approach in that chapter, there's several different templates and structures I give, but I think the one that's most useful across the most situations is called the trade-off, which is essentially if X is added, then Y has to give. And you mentioned this early on in our conversation. Okay, if I hear this new thing is a priority, if so, then we have to temporarily slow down on something else. I would recommend it's this, that we, drag this timeline out by another 2 months so we can focus on this new item, but ultimately the decision is yours. So you're using the psychology of forced choice there. You are framing it is A or it is B. What would you like to do? So I believe you have kids. Yes.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you may know, so many people have said this to me. Oh, it's like I do with my toddler. I tell them, you are wearing pants today. Would you like the black pants or the red pants?
That's good.
Instead of, do you want to wear clothes? No, it's which item do you want?
We can only wear one. Well, I guess we could technically throw them, but yes.
Exactly. Exactly. And so not saying that our managers are toddlers, but human psychology is human psychology.
Hey, that's right. We're all human.
Yes. And so that positions you as someone who is being thoughtful about bandwidth, who is coming to the table as a collaborator instead of just shutting down the conversation and saying, no, we can't do that. You're negotiating. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. This is such great work, Melody. I love your perspective on it. We already are over time. 1 minute left, 30 seconds. Just if you could give us one word on feedback, and then of course, anything else people can connect with you. Definitely follow Melody on LinkedIn, get her book, Managing Up. I'm just so grateful for this work. Thank you for the value it's adding to me and to, I'm sure, this audience.
Yeah, thank you. And when it comes to feedback, work on creating a shared goal up front. It gets back to the triple win, right? Even starting with something like, I think we can both agree we want to do what's best for the client here. Just something like that to show you are on the same side of the table before you say something that may be perceived as critical or corrective.
Anything else you want people to know, Melody, about your work or what you have going on?
Well, like I said, if you are interested in that idea of your professional power position, my first book, Trust Yourself, is really about managing your own inner psychology, the doubts and insecurities that hold you back, people-pleasing patterns. And this book is about being able to navigate that with others. So there's a little something for everyone, wherever you're at.
Melody, this has been so much fun. We ran out of time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you, friend, for sticking around to the end of this episode. You are a member of the Intentional Leader Elite because you just finished an hour-long conversation to help you grow and develop as a leader. You are someone that I would bet on. So thank you for investing in yourself. That does make you better, and it's going to inspire people, and it's going to make the world a better place, which gets me really excited. So before you take off, let me leave you with 3 specific takeaways that I hope you'll put into action this week. Number 1, start with the alignment conversation. Whether you're new to your role or you've been in the role for 10 years, just pause and go ask your leader, what does great performance look like over the next 3 to 6 months? And don't assume you're aligned. Make sure you are confirming it and getting them to articulate what good looks like and what great looks like. Number 2, know the style to gain influence. Leaders aren't mind readers, so study your manager's work and communication style and then flex. Do they want the bottom line up front? Are they story driven? Adapt how you share your ideas to make sure you get buy-in. And then number 3, own your value with the triple win. Before you pitch a new idea, frame it around what's in it for you, your boss, and then the broader organization. And that's how you stop being seen as just helpful and start being seen as strategic. If this resonated, go grab Melody's book, Managing Up. You can follow her on LinkedIn. I always enjoy her post. And consider what it might look like to step more fully into your professional power position, as she likes to say. And if this episode helped you, would you do me a huge favor and share it with one other leader in your life? My goal is always to impact just one person. That's my hope. I hope it impacted you, and I hope you'll continue to help it multiply to impact other people. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. That helps me a lot. And I hope you go and have a wonderful week. And remember, life is short. Let's go make it count.